It's interesting because they had shut one of our competitors. They had shut them down a couple of years ago, and I watched part of that, and they weren't even allowed to have an appeal process. They weren't even allowed to go through the appeal process. Nationwide, it's staggering. If you take a look at the numbers, revocations are up nearly 6 times. Number of dealers has decreased by nearly 80% from 94 to 2005. A lot of this started with what they term as the kitchen table dealers, and has moved on to small gun dealers such as ourselves. Earlier this year, I was at a distributor show, and an attorney who's representing manufacturers and distributors, his name is Chris Schiafulo. He got up, he was speaking to hundreds and hundreds of gun dealers, and he was letting them know that the ATF is going after gun dealers, and they couldn't go after manufacturers, and they couldn't go after the distributors, so they've been going after dealers, and they've been picking them off left and right. I'm sitting next to this guy who, kind of leans to me and says, "Ryan, is this for real?" And I said, "Yeah. In fact, we're going through it right now." And what's interesting is, so many dealers are going through this. Take a look at some of the numbers. The dealers, if they can't fight them in federal court, then they pretty much go bankrupt. It's tough to go against the federal government. And when I've spoken to a lot of dealers and let them know that there's no air room for at all for some of these businesses. And I've spoken up and telling people as well that we're an old established business with a 99.6% success rate in the most Second Amendment friendly state in the union, where our senior senator sits on the board of directors for the NRA, and that this can happen anywhere. And so this is what these dealers are going up against.
How many dealers do you think, and those percentage of dealers you think, are really tuned in, fully aware of how the government is trying to destroy them?
I think everybody's just trying to keep their heads low at this point. I think Why would
you think they want to keep their head low when they're in the right and the government's in the wrong?
Because, as you know, there's a fear of the federal government. A lot of people do not want to speak out against the federal government. A lot of these dealers, even a lot of who I've spoken with, I've said, "Why aren't you speaking out against this?" And they said, "We don't want to, raise the ire of the, of the ATF." And they don't understand that they're not going to back off. That if you keep quiet, they're not going to be your buddy. They're not going to be your pal. When I started speaking up, my mom asked me, "Is this a good idea?" And I said, "What's the worst that they're going to do? Revoke our license?" They're already attempting to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting that a lot of firearms owners fear the government, and the government realizes that, and so it makes it easier for the government to destroy people. The government thrives on citizens who are fearful. There's a term that the ATF uses called willfully. They claim that you committed violations willfully. Can you go into that a little?
Reagan in Congress in the 80s put the word willful in the wording. It was made the responsibility of the ATF to show that dealers committed these acts willfully. They'll come in and what they're doing is they're using that against dealers. They'll come in the first time, find violations, whether it's 1 or 100 violations, and they'll come back in later at another time and say, "Okay, we caught you once, we caught you again, second time it's willfully." They can't do an audit. They can it's got to be only once a year that they can do an audit, but they'll keep coming in until they find it. Willful is a word that's up to interpretation. Most dealers view willful as the word as intentional, that you committed these acts intentionally. In our case, did we commit these acts willfully or intentionally? No. The ATF says that if you committed any violations once and you do it again, it's willful. What's interesting, though, is in our case is that our violations in 2000 and then again in 2005 weren't even the same. So it doesn't even have to be the same violations. It just has to be any violations.
It's interesting, the ATF holds everyone to a higher standard than they're able to attain. In our film, The Gang, we show documentation of how the ATF will lie in court, perjure themselves, to claim that they have accurate records of gun owners, and machine guns especially. What kind of response have you gotten in support from gun groups, and how has this affected your business?
Well, right now we're sitting at well over $50,000 in legal fees, and we're not even to court yet. We went from 1,000 guns down to 160. We let 2 of our employees go. Got a little bit of bad press early on. The problem is everyone believes the government assumes the worst. I was getting phone calls from people saying, how many missing guns do you have, and explaining to them, no missing guns or anything like that. But a lot of people don't believe it. A lot of people sit there and, assume the worst, go, okay, there must be something funny because the government wouldn't just shut down dealers for petty violations, now would they? And so, we had also dropped all of our advertising, so our walk-in traffic was, it dropped significantly as well. And, and speaking with some of our manufacturers, the manufacturers and distributors, they're aware of this, but a lot of them don't know what to do. You get groups such as the NRA and the NSSF. They're aware of this, but haven't really spoken up against it. A lot of them have, a lot of other relationships with the ATF, and so they really have not spoken up against this. In fact, one, with the Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms, Joe Waldron, who's their executive director, actually spoke up against us. He had said, you have to ask yourself, is the ATF out headhunting, or maybe Reds has some issues? It's a serious business, and you have to ensure you and your employees are keeping up with the law. And the problem is that most people assume the worst. I used to do this. I used to hear about some dealer being shut out of business, and I thought, oh, okay, good. It's another bad dealer who must be doing something completely dishonest. Because if you look on the ATF's website, they tell these slanted stories about some of the work that they're doing, and what they do is, and then they have this small little line at the bottom that says everyone is innocent until proven guilty. Everyone in the industry right now is aware of this problem, but the problem is the general public isn't aware of it. People, when I've started speaking to people, people are outraged because they see the writing on the wall and they know this is another backdoor attack on their Second Amendment rights. But again, there seems to be this fear of the government that, a lot of the people in the industry, even some of these organizations are afraid to speak up against them. And that's just it is, at what point do you speak up? At what point, at how many losses do we have to take, until some of these groups, until some of these manufacturers and distributors say enough is enough and we have to speak up?
That's a very good question. I think that with our film, The Gang, people will finally understand how the ATF is a bunch of government gangsters. That's why we call the film The Gang. I think this will be a great step forward, using the film, to wake people up, including dealers who are just ducking, as you say, trying to just stay away from trouble, but only helping trouble find them. How would you say this issue is affecting the industry, and what kind of response you're getting from other dealers? And
most dealers are just saying, I've had a lot of other dealers say, hey, do you have a legal defense fund? Can we help you out? What can we do? A lot of them are sitting by, waiting for some kind of leadership, waiting for someone to act. I'm getting some dealers who are going, hey, calling me up and saying, hey, Ryan, I think you're wrong. I just went through an audit and they just gave me a warning. And I said, okay, well, that's, you're not listening to me. That's your first warning. That's your first warning. That was the setup for Woelfel. The next time they find anything, they're going to shut you down. And and the problem is that we're this industry is faced with so many attacks. You got the Bloomberg attacks right now. They're going after dealers on setting up these cases against dealers. And and everybody's just